spokesman Jay Carney seemed to crack open the door to the possibility of arming Libya's rebels. The Obama administration is also looking into more humanitarian relief and at the possible consequences of a no-fly zone. But the U.S. has again said that it is up to the United Nations to make that decision. Well, let's get more from our White House correspondent, Patty Culhane, who joins us now from the White House. Well, Patty, first of all, let's get to what was said at the White House, these comments made by Jay Carney on arming the rebels. What did he have to say about that?
Well, I have to tell you, AlJazeera, that this administration has been incredibly careful to not give any sort of opinion, give any sort of hint as to what it wants to see happen when it comes to international intervention in Libya. Now, just yesterday, Wednesday at the State Department, the spokesman was asked, could you arm the rebel groups? Is that being considered? Because, you know, they keep saying that all options are on the table. Well, the State Department spokesman said that under the UN sanctions, the arm embargo, that it would be illegal. Well, today, Jay Carney at the White House said that they thought they had the latitude within those sanctions, that they could do that if they chose to. We're also seeing some contradictions as to what it would take for the U.S. to get involved. Now, today, the spokesman said when it comes to intervention, the U.S. and, of course, NATO reserve the right to act on its own. At the very beginning of this, the administration was pointing to NATO, saying it wanted to see some NATO action. Then they said they would like to see something from the United Nations. Now it seems that the Secretary of State is saying that something has to happen at the UN. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
We believe it's important that this not be an American or a NATO or a European effort. It needs to be an international one. And there is still a lot of opposition, as you probably know, within the Security Council. But we're working to try to come up with a good, solid international package.
So, Patty, as you were saying a little earlier on, a lot of contradictions. But if a no-fly zone does get authorization by the United Nations Security Council, is the U.S. ready to take part? I mean, and what is the U.S. military's thinking on this?
Well, the administration says that they are planning, that they have moved assets into the area, and you can get a bit of a hint as to what they're thinking if you look at what they have moved into the Mediterranean. So far, 2 amphibious assault ships, and basically those have helicopters and Marines and amphibious transport. Those are really the ships that leaders look to when it comes to a humanitarian mission. Now, sources at the Pentagon had been telling me that the USS Enterprise, which was in the Red Sea, could possibly be moved into the Med. Now, if you wanted to do anything like electronic jamming, although AWACS, which are in the area, could do that, you'd probably want an aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise. That would most likely be needed for a no-fly zone. Well, in Capitol Hill testimony on Wednesday, the Chief of Naval Operations said simply that he has no orders to move the USS Enterprise into the Mediterranean. So I think that was pretty telling as to what the administration is thinking right now.
All right, Patty Culhane for us live at the White House. Patty, thanks very much. Now, while as global powers debate that idea of a no-fly zone over Libya, President Obama's approach to military intervention is also being tested. As the violence escalates on the ground, the U.S. Commander-in-Chief will soon have to decide if Gaddafi's crackdown requires a more forceful U.S. response. And Rosalind Jordan has more on that part of the story.
Barack Obama has never issued what one might call a doctrine for his foreign policy. But he did say this soon after becoming president.
Rules must be binding. Violations must be punished. Words must mean something.
In the case of Libya, with almost daily reports of government attacks on civilians, the president's words have become a test for his administration. Civilians and rebel fighters have been pleading with the U.S. for protection. And in 2005, the U.S. and other member states endorsed the United Nations Responsibility to Protect doctrine, which calls on these countries to intervene if they believe genocide is occurring, something that didn't happen for Rwanda or Kosovo. White House officials say they're already responding.
When the ethnic cleansing began in April of '92 in Bosnia, it took over a year for an asset freeze, over 2 years for a travel ban. Again, our actions were in under 2 weeks in this case.
One former State Department official under the Bush administration says Obama's own words may have boxed him in.
Here because he's gotten pretty far out ahead by saying that Gaddafi has to step down, that he's lost moral and legitimacy to govern. And so he's on the line to actually carry out what he has said.
But a former U.S. State Department official under the Obama administration told AlJazeera the fighting in Libya isn't genocide per se. That said,
we are going to see evidence of extraordinary brutality. We're already seeing it in terms of just mowing down civilians, but I think this is not going to be something that a president is going to want to have on his conscience.
Also confusing observers, Obama's statement made during his speech in Cairo.
So let me be clear. No system of government can or should be imposed by one nation by any other.
And it's this statement that may be part of the reason why there's little support for a no-fly zone. But the statement is not enough to form a clear doctrine either. Instead, Obama has been dealing with popular uprisings in the Middle East on a nation-by-nation basis, and always with the intent, he says, of letting the citizens determine their fate. Rosalind Jordan, AlJazeera, Washington.
Well, joining me now is Colonel Stephen Ganyard. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and a former Marine Aircraft Commander. Colonel, thank you very much for being with us. So let's talk first of all about the contradictions. I know that, to some extent, the policy is changing and it's an evolving situation depending on what's happening on the ground. But these contradictions and the trepidation in that building behind us, how do you think that this administration is eventually going to respond to the events in Libya?
It's difficult to say, but it's interesting that the trepidation that exists there also exists up on Capitol Hill as well. And you're seeing both Democrats and Republicans calling for military options when I don't think the problem has actually been defined. Nobody has really said what is our intent in Libya, and there's sort of this...
And that is important, why, given the U.S.'s history in that particular part of the world, and the fact that the U.S. has already engaged in 2 wars which are arguably a mess, and no solution there that's certainly on the horizon.
Correct, but we get frustrated on the diplomatic side, and so our quick reaction is, well, we'll go to a military side. And I think there's some things that can be done in between. This is also something where we need to realize that this is the Libyan people's fight, and this is their future that is being decided here, and that for the U.S. to come in with a very heavy hand may not be in our best interest or in their best interest either.
Well, we now see the U.S. pushing the door open, perhaps, to arming the rebels. I mean, this is something that Jay Carney kind of seemed to be suggesting. Again, what's being proposed here is more militarism. I mean, how good an idea do you think this is, actually?
There's dangers along the way, that it could backfire, that it could, in fact, not help the rebels at all. I think there's some things that can be done in the interim. There are things that we can do to help the communications that have been shut down by Colonel Gaddafi. We can do things like establish remote cell phone towers. We can put aircraft in the air that it can act as internet servers. We can do things to reopen the social media that led to the Arab Spring itself.
Right, but how long would it take the United States to be able to bring all of that kind of hardware to bear on the region, so that there were other options that it had on the table, other than a no-fly zone, other than perhaps arming the rebels?
Things like that would not take that long. The thing that would take long would be the military option. To bring in a sizable military force to establish a no-fly zone would take weeks, if not months. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we think we have in terms of time? What do the rebels have in time? And then once we establish something like that, how long is it going to take to have effect? I think that there are much